So let's talk about the roll-up playbook. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Marco Palmero, founder of Ulysses. Our company helps private equity groups, strategic buyers, search funds, advisors in sourcing deal flow. So we source motivated sellers off market that are interested in exiting their business so that our clients can close more deals or sign more clients as sales side clients. Now, what is the roll-up playbook? A lot of people are kind of like hot about the roll-up playbook. I see a lot of folks being very interested in the idea lately. And the concept itself is pretty straightforward. It's simple. I'll try to make it as simple as possible. We're talking about building a model where you try to buy multiple businesses, consolidate them together, make them more valuable through economies of scale, and then exit for a higher valuation. So the objective of a roll-up is to find multiple businesses that are small, then you acquire them, consolidate them together, kind of like create something that is more valuable because the sum of the parts is more valuable than the single units taken by themselves. And of course, you can then make money by exiting that new entity that you created. Of course, other things that you can do in between as you run the business, you can improve efficiencies, reduce costs through economies of scale, and all these sorts of things. But the overall idea is you buy a lot of tiny pieces, you put them together into a bigger piece, and then you sell the big piece for more money. Now, a lot of players are, and a lot of people are working, through this model, private equity groups, strategic buyers, groups of investors. To some respect, even search funds may evolve into roll-ups because initially they might just want to buy one business, but then they realize, well, they can add more value or they have bandwidth to make more acquisitions. And so they ultimately become kind of like a quasi roll-up and they start buying multiple assets. Why do I want to talk about this and why I feel it's important given the fact that a lot of people are kind of like feeling hot about the roll-up strategy lately? Well, because it's important to understand what is the most important part of a roll-up strategy and what makes a roll-up successful or unsuccessful. And that is not capital, despite what you might believe. It is deal flow. And to some respect, it is the quality and quantity of deal flow that you can access. And that's why I want to discuss this idea of owning your own infrastructure. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of people start making acquisitions, even if they planned out for a roll-up, leveraging resources that might not be helpful for them as they progress through the roll-up. What do I mean by that? Well, they might get deals in the very beginning through brokers, networks, and through some of their concentrated efforts. And despite these things are totally fine if you're planning to buy your first business, I see a lot of them struggling in leveraging these strategies after the second, the third, and the fourth acquisition for a couple of different reasons. First, they get more busy running the business, and so that becomes a constraint for them. They cannot spend a lot of time and resources into doing the things themselves because they also have a business to run. At the same time, these parties are not 100% controlled by them, so they're third parties, by definition. And as a consequence, as you start to require more deals and need the kind of like a better pipeline, an organized pipeline, you end up in a situation where there's no consistency, and it is very difficult for you to kind of like transition these parties and these relationships to a different model that brings you more opportunities on a consistent basis. You can still use them. I'm not saying that they become irrelevant. It's just that they are not as effective as they might have been when you were just sourcing your first acquisition. And I've seen that happening many times over. Sometimes people come to us saying, we just made our first acquisition. We realize our pipeline is not big enough or is not moving fast enough. We need somebody to accelerate the process for us, to help us build an internal infrastructure that brings us deals consistently. Marco, can you help? And the answer is yes, of course. We source deals on behalf of people, so that's exactly what we do. Now, I know what you're thinking. You might be saying, well, Marco, but you do source deals for people, so fundamentally, you're also a third party. What this has, how this relates to owning your own infrastructure? Well, there's a key difference between brokers, network, and other third-party relationships and what we do, or what you might be doing if you decide to build an internal deal flow system for your company. The key difference is that you control every step and kind of like have kind of like complete ownership over the process, the relationship, and the leads themselves. So if you build your internal infrastructure, of course, you have your own team running the system. And by the way, we also help people doing that if you want to get the system in place and kind of like installed into your business. But of course, if you build your own internal deal origination, team, of course, you own everything and you have no issues. But if you work with somebody like us, you still own 100% of the process, because all the leads are proprietary to you. They're not sold to anybody else. The pipeline itself is proprietary to you. You have full visibility over it, control over it. Even messaging and kind of like relationship wise, you're always in control. So what we're fundamentally talking about here is whether you want to offset some of the investments and costs associated with building the system yourself, and you want somebody to run the process for you, or you want to do it on your own. On this, to the same degree, it's also a matter of understanding how much work you're willing to put in, because if you're building your own internal team, it's going to take a lot of work, a lot of people that you're going to need to hire, hundreds of thousands of dollars, most likely. Instead, if you outsource to somebody that becomes your partner, for this journey, 5, 7, 10-year journey, then you basically have somebody that handles the origination, and you can just focus on closing deals, and you can build that pipeline and that momentum quicker, which is what I just discussed. So those are some of the key differences between model that is helping you sourcing deals and you building your own internal system. But both ways are enabling you to own your own infrastructure. So why is that important? Well, because one, you're going to need more volume and more quality, and most people realize it too late. Brokers will not be enough. Network will not be enough. You need to have your own pipeline of deals, your own off-market process that reaches out to business owners, builds relationships, and nurtures relationships, maybe even months in the future. Because if you are into this game to acquire multiple companies through a roll-up strategy, even a deal that might, begin communication or conversations today and close 6-9 months in the future is still worth pursuing, because you are in it for the long term and you want to make multiple acquisitions anyway. The problem is, if you don't have your own infrastructure, you can nurture that relationship. Another broker might have that deal and ends up selling it to somebody that is more ready than you are, or your network might have a deal that then pulls out or does something else. You don't have that level of leverage and control over these relationships, and you cannot plan and build your pipeline according to your needs. That's what I'm trying to say. So owning your infrastructure is key, because then you can, one, control the amount of people that are coming into the funnel depending on your availability for making acquisitions. You can then determine how many you want to filter and select based on these needs, and ultimately, depending on how many deals you want to close in the next quarter, 2 quarters, or next year, you can plan the acquisition strategy the right way. If you stick to other methodologies, you're just kind of like putting together a bunch of different efforts, scattered efforts, I would call them, and you're not really pushing, for acquiring multiple assets and kind of like completing the roll up in a timely fashion. Because one of the important aspects to understand with a roll up is that we don't want to take forever to acquire a bunch of assets. Ideally, we want to have a strong cadence of acquisitions that are coming in, that we're acquiring, integrating into the system, and ultimately, continuously working towards integrating new assets into the main holdco. If we don't have a pipeline that can enable us to do that, the process is just going to be very clunky. It's not going to be, systematized, and you're ultimately going to have maybe a deal team that is, bored because they don't have new deals, or in some situation they're overworked because all deals come at once, and everything becomes very inconsistent in nature. So owning your infrastructure is probably the most important thing if you're planning to do a roll up, because ultimately, once you have that in place, you know how many deals can come through. You can monitor that, nurture the relationship, plan ahead. And again, you can do it in many different ways. You can have an M&A partner like ourselves sourcing all the deals for you. You focus on closing. We stay with you for long term, and you don't have to worry about origination ever again. Or if you want to build it internally, we can also provide you with the blueprints, methodologies and strategies that we use so that you can plug them into your system. Of course, in that case, it might be a little bit more expensive for you because you're going to need to hire staff and do all these sorts of things that you might not need to do if you work with us. But again, it all comes down to you and what you feel is more valuable for you in your business. Maybe you determine that an internal team has a higher ROI and you might want to make a larger investment up front that will pay dividends later. Fine, we can help you structure that system so you have all the strategies and automations in place to then have the team step in and run the process for you, and then you control it 100%. Or you might say, I still want control, but I want to do less work. I don't want to be involved in the day-to-day sourcing process too much, so I have Marco and the team take care of that. We just check in regularly to make sure we're aligned on the strategy, and then I have him bring me deals consistently for the long term until I'm done acquiring businesses and my roll-up strategy is complete. So both ways work. It's just a matter of understanding what is it that is more effective for you in this particular case. But in all instances, it all comes down to owning your infrastructure, and that is what I would recommend to everybody doing a roll-up, because the other channels of origination can still deliver deal flow for you, don't get me wrong, but they're not going to be enough to successfully complete the roll-up. So hopefully that makes sense. By the way, if you want to check out more about how we can help you with these things, you can check the link below in the description and find out more about available slots that we might have for this, despite the fact we only take on a few clients every month. If we have availability and if your project matches what we do, happy to take a look and see how we can help. So hope that makes sense, and I will see you in the next one.